Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March 2013 edition of the Professor Messer Network Plus Study Group. Study group we do every week where we take your questions and I try to answer them. And try, I think, probably is the operative word, but hopefully you'll see that as we go through this session today, this turned out to be a pretty good month. You guys sent me some great questions this month. I'm able to go outside the scope of Network Plus again a bit. You know, I have these videos online. The entire Network Plus course is available for free. You can watch the whole thing from end to end, but the videos don't really allow me to go outside the scope of the exam too much. I really want to have the videos focus on what you need to know to pass the exam, which I think is a pretty good idea if you're trying to study and take this exam. But there's a lot of concepts that go a little bit beyond the norm when you're dealing with those types of things. So there's some of that in this study group this month, some good things. If you are here live, you can see when we do this live on professormesser.com/calendar. And if you are watching this live on the Professor Messer website, there's a chat at the bottom. And I'm watching the Network Plus study group chat. Some of you are private messaging me. I'm sorry, I have to deny them at the moment. But if you want to get in touch with me afterwards, I'm in the chat quite a bit, or you can always hit the Contact Us link at the top of the page. This is something, as I mentioned, we do every month, and we do this because we have folks like you who not only watch the videos online, which is incredibly important to what we're doing here. Thank you very much for watching those videos. We also have people that like to take the videos with them when they go offline. They like to be able to take them when they're on a plane, when they're in their car, and be able to listen to them with MP3 files, or be able to take the PDFs of all of the slides that I have, and I have those available for sale. If you'd like to take those with you offline, you can find them at professormesser.com/download-network plus. Probably couldn't make that more difficult. Download-network plus. I do try to stay up with what's going on. It's one of those things where I always want to do more on Twitter, and I'm trying really hard to do that. Today, you can get my A+ pop quiz, plus some smatterings of things every once in a while at professormesser.com/Twitter. And also, you can find me on YouTube at professormesser.com/YouTube. So that's where we start. But before we get going, let's talk about where we've been, because I mentioned I do one of these every month. So I want to show you what we did last month. So if you watched us last month, or you missed the one from last month, you missed this question that talked about, see if I can get my head out of the way so you can actually see what's going on with that piece. Could you explain the different classes and range of IP addresses? I answered the question, if we're running out of IPv4 addresses, and indeed we are running out of IPv4 addresses, why can't the Class E addresses be used to expand the amount of usable IPv4 addresses? Indeed, why would you disable the SSID in your wireless access point? If Wi-Fi is CSMACD, but wait, is it CSMACA? Which one of those, and what's the difference? What is EAP? And I don't seem to understand subnetting. Welcome to the world of the rest of us, and wondered if there's a lot of it on the exam. All those questions are brought up and talked about on last month's Network Plus study group. The archive of all of those can, of course, be found on the Professor Messer website at the bottom of the index of Network Plus videos. Then, of course, they're also on YouTube as well. So quite a lot that you can get going on there. If you are already someone who has your Network Plus certification and you'd like to renew that certification using continuing education units, you can go to certification.comptia.org/CEUFAQ, and you can learn about how to do that, because this session counts towards that continuing education credit. You can't use it for all of your continuing education credits, but there's a nice chunk there that you're able to do. So very useful to have that there as well. I also like to ask you questions and get direct information back from you. So I like to ask a number of questions as we go through the study group. Another good reason to watch us live. If you go to VOT.RS using the number 972984, you can answer this question: how long have you been studying for the Network Plus certification? I want to know from you exactly how long it's been. So if all you have to do is go to that website, and you'll be presented with a set of questions for that. I'm going to leave my voting up here. Let's see if I can spin over and show you what I see on my screen. This is what it looks like. Maybe make some more room here so you can actually see something. So you go to vot.rs. Notice I also had that QR code up. So if you have a QR code reader, you can simply scan in that QR code right there on your screen, and it will take you right to that page. If you have your mobile device handy, you can simply go to vot.rs and enter 972984. There's vot.rs 972984 and answer this question. And usually we get different people that are approaching this in many different ways. Some of you have just started studying for this exam. Others of you have been studying for quite some time. If you're like me, you only have time an hour a night, an hour and a half. You're getting a little bit of information. You're waiting until the following evening to get a little bit more. So it takes you a long amount of time. Some of you are in high school. Some of you are in college. You have a little bit more time to study. But some of us take quite a bit of time to figure this out. Or maybe you had to drop it and you had to come back later. You may have been studying for over a year. And we have about the same thing here. A lot of you have been studying for less than 3 months, and some of you over a year. So we have, again, that nice range of Network Plus. Now, fortunately, the Network Plus exam is one exam. You don't have to worry too much about those things. So about finding the types of things that you're looking to see. I think the Network Plus exam in general is one that's a little bit easier to do because you don't have to worry so much about taking multiple exams. You take your one exam, you're done. So I think a lot of people are able to get through it in a relatively short period of time, which I think is a useful part about this certification piece. I would like to also give you some perspectives on some of the things before we jump into Network Plus content. I want to talk about some of the things that I talked about this week with a hiring professional. This happened to be somebody who was in the security field. And I found it interesting as we were talking because I was really discussing with him about people he hires and the interviewing process and what he goes through that. And he talked about what happens after you give somebody a position. When you say, yes, you're the right person for the job, and you offer them that job. And I've always talked to you about how to get the job. In fact, that's where we're really focused is what do I think about? What do I do in an interview? How do I think about getting that next position that I'm looking for? How do I change what I'm doing along those lines? And that is something important, of course, but he talked to me about a number of problems that occurred after he had hired someone. So I wanted to share some of these with you. One of these is, you should say, don't take a job and try to negotiate salary on day one. You can kind of see that day one. This is a situation where he had a person accept a position. And during this acceptance process, there's negotiation. The employer might ask you, what are you expecting to make? And you need to have numbers ready. Well, I would like to make this much in this position. You come up with an agreement. You get an offer letter, which says, we're accepting you into this position. Here's what you will make. I mean, it's all written down. It's almost contractual, but it's at least so everyone knows that you indeed are able to understand what we are offering you. There's no questions. Well, he had a person come in, and on day one, he said, I didn't like that number. I'd like more money than you actually offered. And he didn't know what to tell him. He said, well, let's talk about why, because you took the position knowing it would be this number. That's the wrong time to negotiate. If you're trying to move up, you're looking for a particular amount of money, don't be afraid to ask what you're looking for. If it's a reasonable amount and the job pays that, then that's what you may be able to make for your career. But it's too late when you walk in on day one. And at the end of the day, you end up having a bad situation where both of you are not happy with what happened. We also have this happen. He told me about offering a position to someone. He was going to show up on Monday at 9 o'clock. He didn't show up on Monday. This happened to be for a contractor. So it was not an employee. So he, of course, called the contracting company and said, well, where is the person that took this? And that's the one that he finally came in, and then after a day was gone, and he didn't come back. He finds out that the person ended up taking another job at the same time. He almost accepted 2 jobs at the same time, took 2 offer letters, tried this one out, and then just left. and ended up, he found out later the person actually took a different job in the same week. The problem with this, first, it's relatively selfish to do it this way because there are a lot of resources and a lot of effort put into going through the hiring process. When you come on site, filling out the forms, getting into the system, getting your payroll going, getting insurance, there's costs and efforts and things associated with that. The worst part about this, of course, is that our industry is a relatively small industry. Seems like this would be enormous, but as they say, it's a small world, and it's the same thing in our industry. We all talk to each other. We all understand when these types of things happen. We know when people do this, and we share it with the people in other organizations so they don't run across the same problem. So you don't want to have yourself put out to the side and nobody hiring you because you did something really stupid like this. Another one was where somebody did come in, and then on the second day, they just didn't show up. And the third day, they didn't show up. And he was worried that did something happen to them? Was there a family emergency? Those things happen. He absolutely could understand that piece. But he never showed up. He called this person who had a headhunter, had someone arrange for the position. They couldn't find them. It took about a week. He finally found the person in a different job. So he kept calling, and he had his mobile number. It's hard to lose anybody these days. Could not find the person because he had taken another job but didn't tell anybody. Now, we can understand where you might get into the first day and you know what? It's not right for me. And tell somebody, say, I'm sorry, it didn't work out. We gave it a shot. I thought it would be something different. It wasn't, or whatever. But don't just leave someone hanging. You do want to leave there without burning any bridges. And I'm glad people in the chat room are agreeing with me that was not very bright. It's not a good way to work professionally. So just a couple of things this week I ran across that I thought I'd share with you, and how important it is to think even after getting hired about how important this is. Let's now do some questions. I told you sent me some great questions. So let's go through the process of seeing what you sent me this week. So get your QR codes readers ready. I have a question for you. Now about these questions, if you are in the chat room, do not answer this in the chat room. This is a question just for our quiz website. So if you are in the chat room, do not answer this, because the question is, what part of a virtual machine creates and manages virtual machines or virtual servers? It can almost have a different term associated with that. There's part of a virtual device that is in charge of managing all the little tiny virtual machines within it. I just didn't have enough text to put all of that on my screen. And as the chat room is saying, don't answer here. Don't answer here. You want to go to vot.rs using number 333765. So I'm sorry that the question's kind of redundant, but the idea is there that if you have a virtual device, you set up a virtual machine, a box that is going to store many other virtual systems inside of it, virtual servers inside of it, and other devices. What do you call the thing that manages all of that? Now, if you go to vot.rs or you use that QR code, you will see, I'm going to pull it up on my screen, the answers that are available to you. I've got my votes hidden, so let's flip over to that. There we go. And here it is. You've got the choice between Hypermanager, Virtualvisor, Hypervisor, Virtual Manager, and Fred. Well, it's got to be one of those. You could probably take one of them off the list right now. I'm guessing. I'm thinking that that's probably the case. That's a good example. Now, as you vote on this, I'll see how many respondents here. You go to vot.rs. It's number 333765, 333765 at vot.rs. And you can put your answer in there. Well, we got 27 answers. Let's see what most people say. And the answers are, 2 people said Hypermanager, 1 said Virtualvisor. And then we've got kind of a tie between Hypervisor, although Hypervisor's winning a little bit more, and then Virtual Manager, which is number 11. Well, I made up the terms Hypermanager, Virtualvisor, and Virtual Manager. Completely made up things. The actual term is Hypervisor, although I kind of like Virtual Manager. It has a nice ring to it, but I made it up. So not a real thing. But Hypervisor, yes, that is indeed the answer we were looking for. And most of you got it absolutely right. 18 of you said, oh yeah, I know what that is. It's the hypervisor. So when you hear that term hypervisor, we're really talking about that overlay between the virtual world and the physical world. And that becomes important because something has to control all of that. Something has to take this machine that has a ton of disk space on it and a ton of memory on it. And it has to be able to take all of that and use different parts of it on different virtual machines. You get a little bit of disk space, you get a little bit of disk space, you get a little bit of memory, you have a connection to the network. And that's the real question. The connection to the network is the one that came in this month. The question came in from KP that said, don't virtual machines need a physical connection to the network? It's one of those things as we're teaching virtualization. It's such a popular topic. We don't even talk about how we connect to the real world a lot in these conversations. And of course, just like your mobile phones, you've got a mobile device you use, you talk on it all the time, there's no wires, but somehow it gets to somebody who's on a real phone that has wires. Eventually it has to connect to a physical device. And the same thing with virtual devices. It has to connect to a real device, it has to connect to a real network somewhere. Well, this virtual machine manager, this hypervisor, is really more than a supervisor. As I mentioned, it's bridging the two things between. There's a couple of different kinds of hypervisors you might run into. One is a type 1, which is just a bare metal box. You get a server in, you put a code, you put a software on the server that manages that. It effectively becomes the operating system for this machine, and it runs all of these virtual machines that are underneath it. So you'll see this referred to as things like VMware ESX or the newer ESXi, or Microsoft Hyper-V are a couple of good examples of that. Now there's also other types that are hypervisors that run in your existing operating system. And if you've seen my videos that I did for A+, where I install Windows 7, I install Windows Vista, I install Windows XP and all of those other operating systems, or you've taken my Microsoft course and there's an Active Directory server and there is a separate management device and there's an user workstation and we're doing deployment of software. I did that all on one desktop. I did that all with hypervisor that's running in my existing operating system on my machine. So great technology to use, but let's talk about the network piece of it. That was the real question that came in, was network piece. So if you think about environments that are in a big data center, there are hundreds of servers out there. And it's very, very hard. In fact, I would say these days, everybody's virtualized. All of the significantly sized organizations have virtual systems that are running there. The virtualized networks that are out there and virtualized systems, they took all of these different servers that used to be independent devices and they shrunk them down into one machine, two machines, three machines. Think of what that saves for power and efficiency, flexibility, modification of the devices and resources. But of course, these things were always connected together originally with switches. So in a virtual environment, we're connecting it together with switches as well. If you're migrating all the servers, you also migrate the network configuration, your VLANs, your switching environment, what's going to route, all of that. So the real question is, what happens to the network? Well, we stick it inside the virtual environment. And I found a really good picture of this virtual environment, and it is on this URL. If you go to, here we go, bit.ly, bit.ly, and this is all in the appropriate capitalization. It is case sensitive /11, capital Y, capital C, capital X, letter 8, number 8, lowercase r. That's 11, capital YCX, 8, lowercase r. You have to type it in just like that, with the 11 and the capital Y and the capital C and the capital X and the number 8 and the lowercase r. I don't know what my brain's thinking today. But there's a great picture in there that really shows how this works in the virtual world. In fact, it takes you to this enormous PDF file. In fact, I've got a shot. We can go to this page right here. So here's this really big PDF file that's out there for this. That is a great picture of all of the different options. This one happens to be for VMware, but it's a great resource. I wonder if I can really get more drilled down into this so we can see what it's like. And the picture that I have up, boy, okay, I went a little too far there. the picture, the picture that I have up, it's such a big PDF. It's actually slow on my desktop, and I have a brand new machine with all the fancy stuff, the fastest graphics I could get, because this is what I do this machine you're looking at is the one I do my video editing on. So it's remarkable that this PDF is so big and so complex that it even makes my machine drag along. But look at what this picture is trying to show. You've got this virtual device. Here's this virtual box, this virtual machine. And this machine has some virtual software, a hypervisor on it, and it has 4 physical NIC cards associated with it, or really, as they're calling it, physical Ethernet adapters. So you can see there's 4 Ethernet adapters in there. Now, on the virtual machine, there might be hundreds of devices that are running on this box. They have a good example of how you can have all of these different virtual machines, and each virtual machine has its own virtual Ethernet adapter that connects to a virtual switch. So you took that entire switching infrastructure you had in the physical world and you simply placed it into the virtual world. And you can even have different port groups, or different VLANs is one way of thinking, although port groups can allow us to do some other things as well. You can have other ports available that are specific to different capabilities inside of this virtual device, but notice they all eventually connect out to physical devices. So the question that was asked about, isn't there a connection to the physical world and how that works? This poster really shows quite nicely exactly what that looks like. I think that was a very good example of how you can take that idea of virtualization and even getting it into that particular world. That's one of those things that's very useful. Now in the chat room there, of course, what about, now we're getting into the Ethernet and the networking side of it, but can it route? Does it do layer 3? Does it do layer 2? It does all of those things. These virtual networks and these virtual switches that are inside these virtual devices are extremely powerful. They give you a lot of flexibility. So very, very nice to be able to do some of that. Some great views in there. There's a link in the chat room. Thank you for reposting that link, Rhonda, so that others can get that at bit.ly 11 capital Y, capital C, capital X, the number 8 lowercase r. Very, very, very useful to have that. All right, we have another question that came in, but before we do, I have a quiz question for you. Do not answer in the chat room. The question is, which of these, you'll see what these things are in a moment, which of these describe routers that contain the same topological information? So your network topology that you have set up, let's say that all of your network devices, all of your routers now have exactly the same information across all of them. So what would you call that? If you go to the VOT.rs and you go to 144091, you can vote on this. That's VOT.rs 144091, and you can vote. We've got 4 people. Your questions, or the answers that you can choose from, is this the next hop? Is it convergence? Is it EIGRP? Is it route aggregation? Or is it flapping? Now, all of those things have some perspective. They are all associated with routing. But only one of these things means that all of the routers all contain the same information about the topology to which they are routing. So feel free to go out and give me an answer of, is it next hop? Is it convergence, EIGRP, route aggregation, or flapping? Got 20 respondents so far. Now you really have to, this is one of these cases, and this is important on the Network Plus exam. Some of these things you could look at and go, oh, it's absolutely not that. It's almost as important to be able to decide which one of these things is not the correct answer as it is the one that is the correct answer. And you may be able to get rid of 1 or 2 or 3 of these so that you have a better chance of answering this on the exam. Let's see what our answers are. I didn't fool very many people here. We have next hop, got 1 poor little vote. EIGRP got 3. None of you chose flapping, but I did get a mix here again. 18 of you said convergence, 10 of you said route aggregation. Now, route aggregation is a functionality that allows you to take a set of routes, aggregate them together, and send them off to the entire routing infrastructure as kind of a summary. But that's not what we're looking for. We're looking to understand how can we describe all of the routers having exactly the same information. Because if something changed, so let's say that a router loses a link, something turns off, you lose a connection, somebody goes in with a backhoe and cuts a fiber connection somewhere in Walla Walla, Washington, and your network goes down to that section, that router has to tell everyone about what's going on. And that process is called a converging process. Everything has to converge together so that everyone understands what change just occurred. And once everybody knows what that single change is and everybody's up to date, your network is now converged. Therefore, the answer to this question is convergence. So sometimes I like it when I fool some of you because it's not really fooling. You don't ever learn anything unless you get something wrong. If I break something, I know a lot more about that particular thing once I fix it. So if you missed that one, don't worry about it. Now you know what convergence is used for. Now, of course, next hop is an idea and a methodology around routing metrics. We're going to look at that in just a moment. EIGRP is a routing protocol. That's not a way that you can describe how all routers might have everything the same. This is how you might send information from one router to another so that you can learn exactly what's going on back and forth. And flapping is when a route comes up and then it goes away, and then it comes back up again and then it goes away. The name practically describes it right there, doesn't it? So the reason I bring this up is one of the questions I got is, can you explain more about routing metrics? It's one of those things that we run into when we talk about routing metrics, what we're trying to do, those types of things. I think that's where I like to think about when you get into details about routing, how you might connect different connections together and send information. Because the end stations you're using, all of those things that you ever get into, you take advantage of on your workstation, they have no idea how to get from one place to the other. Your workstation, if you talk to Google, has no idea how to get to Google. Just no clue whatsoever. It's up to the routers that are out there on the network to get you there. And the routers have to get that information back to you. You just have to hope that those routers know what they're doing. So one of the questions that we got from RL was, what is the deal with these routing metrics? What are those about? How do they work? How would I take advantage of them? How would I use them? Is this really what I should be working on, associated with, or should be concerned with? And there's an important part of the Network Plus exam that talks specifically about routing metrics. So let's look a little bit about that. One of those things that was in the routing metrics are really designed so the router can figure out where to take this data. And where this really becomes a challenge is when you are sending data out over the network, there could be more than one way to get there. So your router has to determine, do I go that direction or do I go that direction? I could go left, I could go right. Which one am I going to go to? And that becomes a little bit more of a challenge if there's more than one direction, because you have to figure out where it's these routing metrics that help you make that decision. There's different routing mechanisms, different routers and different routing protocols use different metrics, which of course complicates things a bit, but the idea is the same. These metrics help the router understand what's my best way to go. What is the best path that I can use to be able to send this somewhere? For instance, RIP, the Routing Information Protocol, uses hop counts. Simply looks at the number of hops and sends it down the link that's the closest by number of hops, whichever one has the smaller number of hops to get there. EIGRP, its metric is between 0 and 4 billion, somewhere out there. So you've got a lot of granularity. In fact, it has a lot of different mechanisms that it can use to determine which way is the best route to go. And Windows, if you ever look at a Windows routing table, it uses a metric between 1 and 9999. That's because these routing metrics can be a combination of different things. The routing metric may just be hop count. It may also include the speed of the network, or maybe it's only based on the speed of the network. Maybe it looks at throughput or load or link utilization or the maximum transmission unit, the path reliability, the packet loss, the latency. It can be just one of these metrics. It can be a combination of these things. There's an algorithm that it puts together and figures out what the best way to go and then says, if you want to get to that network, go out that direction right there. So this is, in a way, kind of involved. In fact, Peter in the chat room says, so OSPF, that uses routing metrics. And he uses a number of these metrics, not all of them, but it uses a number of these routing metrics to make that determination. Routing and the mechanisms behind routing can get incredibly complex. There is a lot there. But if you look at the routing metrics themselves, there's a lot of things you can do with that. So Let's look at this particular view of the world. So here's a network. You've got me on one side with my laptop. There's a server that I need to connect to over here. And I want my data to get to the other side. What's the best way to go? So the chat room can look at that and think, looking at this view, you can see once it gets to this first router, there's two ways you can go. You can go up, you can go down. Which one of these is the best one to do? Now, if your routing metrics are purely based on number of hops, I go up here. There you go. I go right up there and go back down again. It's only one hop in between, whereas the others go through 1, 2, 3 hops, 4 finally, and then I'm off to the other side. So from my machine all the way over, I had to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hops. If I go on the bottom, I go through 1, 2, 3 on the top. If I'm running the routing information protocol, or at least the V1 version of that, then there you go. That's the best way to go. But what if this link between these two devices right here and between these two devices, what if both of those links are over T1 lines, but the links down on the bottom are all on a metro Ethernet that all have 100 megabit connectivity across the city to that server? So now my metric for RIP that said go this way was actually the slower link. In fact, a much slower link. I could be going at 10 megabit per second or 100 megabit per second. With Ethernet, with Metro Ethernet, you can have some high-speed connectivity. I could be going 85, 75 times faster by going down the bottom over to the other side back again. So that's where your routing mechanisms become really important, because you may want to set up a different routing method, whether it's static or not, whether it uses some of these metrics. Maybe I'm using OSPF, maybe I'm using AIGRP, maybe I'm using a routing methodology that understands the throughput that's going out, and it will send it out the proper direction. Now, you may ask yourself, why then in the world would you ever use this kind of configuration that has one hop to get there? Well, maybe this is a T1, or maybe it's a DSL line. That's about 1.5 megabit in most average scenarios. I guess a little bit better in some types of situations. But notice that I still have it here, because what if something happens to the Metro Ethernet? This is a very common configuration, by the way, a very common configuration to have it this way. So because you might lose that Metro Ethernet, you need to have redundancy. You need to have some fallback. You need a plan B. And it's very common to have that plan B run over very inexpensive lines. DSL is a great example of that. So that if you did indeed lose connectivity in here, because it's on Metro Ethernet, and as I mentioned, somebody could dig up a street and break your fiber. Happens all the time. And now a lot of the Metro Ethernet in here actually has redundancy built into it as well. But let's say it was a catastrophic failure, you'd at least have another line set up that you could use. So very useful. That's why those metrics are so important. We use those metrics to determine what they're going to do. The protocols themselves have different ways of determining how it's going to send that traffic out, and it uses combinations of those metrics to be able to make that determination. So that was, I think, a pretty good example of how you can't just always look at one way to do things. There has to be a broader scope. And that's a very good example of how you might make that happen. Another question, another pop quiz for the chat room. Do not answer in the chat room. The question is, what networking method places networking functions inside of higher level objects? Networking functions. Now, what in the world am I talking about? So in networks, of course, we're sending data across the network. We're putting this data inside of other things that are on the network. We're putting it inside of TCP. We're putting it inside of IP. We're putting it inside of the information across the Ethernet frame. So that's where you start to think about this networking method that places these things together inside of these higher level objects. Now your choices here, there's a few that you could choose from. Let's have a look at these. One of the choices is encapsulation, one is routing, one is encryption, and one is signaling. Now if you think you know the answer, go to vot.rs and choose 651298, 651298 at vot.rs. What networking method places networking functions inside of higher level objects? You go inside one, inside the other, and it could be encapsulation, it could be routing, it could be encryption, or it could be signaling. One of those things. This is something we do every time we send data across the network. Very, very common to take advantage of data that goes across the network? We have 28 respondents. Let's see what most people say. And the answers are, oh, I really didn't fool anybody with this one. I didn't get a mixed bag out of this one. 27 of you said, yeah, that's encapsulation. No question. We are encapsulating data within this. You take your data, it's encapsulated within TCP, which encapsulates it within IP, which encapsulates it within an Ethernet frame and sends it all on its way. And at the other side, it breaks it all apart again. Sometimes it breaks it apart in the middle to some degree and puts it back together. It's not routing. Routing is the process of sending traffic from one subnet to the other. Encryption would be taking that data and obfuscating it so that you cannot see what's inside of that. There is a piece, though. Those folks that talked about encryption, a lot of encapsulation happens when you are doing encryption. And nobody bought signaling. That's just putting some type of signal on the wire. Now, I mention this because I got a question about it. JE sent a question in and said, what in the world is encapsulation? And you can think of it a lot of different ways. You can take the OSI stack. You can evaluate the different ways of protocols and how they sit inside of an Ethernet packet. I wanted to give you one example of this, and this sort of builds on something else we're going to talk about in a moment. So if we're looking at something called IPSec, and this is important to know for your Network Plus exam, IPSec is an encryption really an encryption standard, really a framework that we have created in our industry that does a lot of different things. And there's a lot of different ways to set it up. There's a lot of things you can do with it. I'm going to show you one way to set up IPSec inside, put data and encrypt it and put it inside of IPSec that uses encapsulation. There's other methodologies behind IPSec that don't use it this way. I have an entire video on IPSec and all of those different pictures you can look at. We're going to focus around something called the authentication header, that's referred to as the AH, and the encapsulation security payload, and that is the ESP. Now, if we look at IPSec, we want to take data, just data that we have that we want to send to the other side, and we want to be able to send that data and have it appear on as it's going through the network in an encrypted form. We don't want to send our raw data to be able to get to the other side and have that happen. So it's important for us to be able to encrypt it in some way. And the IPSec encryption is a great way to do that. The IPSec encryption takes that data and encrypts it all together and encapsulates it within another frame. You could say it takes the IP header and the data and it creates something called an encapsulation security payload trailer and puts all of those things together and encrypts them. Then it sticks other traffic around it because it's encrypted. Now you've encrypted the IP information. Has no idea how to get to the other side because you just encrypted it. So what you have to do is put more information on the inside and outside of that data so that it can get there. We put a new IP header. We put information about that authentication header so we know when it gets to the other side that it really came from us, and the ESP header so that it understands there's encryption inside of this, and at the very end is an integrity check value to ensure that the data got to the other side in one piece. So there's a very good example of how every day with IPSec, which is an incredibly common way to set up VPN connections, virtual private network connections between sites, and VPN connections from your workstation to another site. They use IPSec all day, every day. And that's one way that you can encapsulate data and have it inside of that IPSec view. Now, we talked just a moment ago about these virtual private networks. Now, that leads us into a question that came from BG this month that said, what in the world's tunneling? Because I hear this term tunnel, and in fact, we use the term tunnel in networking in pretty much a common way, but there are nuances around tunnels and how we use them. So let's talk about tunnels in the way that you might look at a VPN, because a virtual private network is a good example of building a tunnel. These tunnels are something like you sitting with your laptop at a coffee shop, you're in Starbucks, you want to be able to communicate back to your corporate network. But if you communicate it out directly to your corporate network, none of that traffic would be encrypted. In fact, anybody in your coffee shop that had a network analysis tool that was listening in to the wireless network, and this happens all the time, they can see that unencrypted information fly through the air as it's going back to your home office. Well, of course, nobody wants that. Nobody in the world wants to be in a position where that is a problem. That's an issue. That's a significant issue. So what you do is you have software in your workstation that builds an encrypted tunnel. It effectively talks directly to your VPN concentrator over a particular IP address. It takes your original data, encrypts it up, sends it across the network to that VPN concentrator, who then decrypts it and sends it off to the inside. So you're no longer talking directly back to corporate. You're instead encrypting everything, and the only thing you're talking to is this VPN concentrator. That's it. You're not talking to anything else. Now, it's a very similar scenario if you are on a corporate network that has one site on one end of the internet and another site on the other end of the internet. The last thing you want to do is take your corporate data and send it from one side to the other over that open link over the internet that anybody could grab that data and have a look. I say anybody, but you'd have to be in the right position. But it's incredibly easy to grab this data as it's going back and forth. Now, one of the things that's important, though, if you're at this remote site with your laptop, you want to be able to get to Google. You want to be able to get to Netflix, maybe not at work. You want to be able to get to eBay. You want to be able to get to the internet. But I also need to be able to get to this remote site. So what you do in these scenarios, we were just talking about IPSec, and IPSec is very common to use. You tell this router that's right here, this router happens to have software inside of it, and sometimes it's done on a firewall, software inside of it that allows it to set up an encrypted tunnel from one site to the other. So you tell this device, if I'm sending information to Google and Netflix and eBay and Yahoo, just send it on its way. Don't change it at all. But if I'm ever sending information to IP addresses that happen to be at our remote site, I want you to take that data and encrypt it and send it directly to the router on the other side, which I've also configured to expect this encrypted information. And through a series of shared passphrases or a series of certificates that you would configure, you can now have that as an encrypted tunnel between both sides. The reason it's a tunnel is this end user and this server have no idea it's there. Completely invisible to them. They think they're sending information directly to an IP address on the other side. They have no idea that their data is being encrypted up. It's being shipped across the network in that tunnel. And on the other side, it's being decrypted again and then sent over to this device. So your end stations have no idea it's there. That's why it's a tunnel. You're just going into this blind tunnel, and away it goes when it gets there. Very useful to have that tunnel functionality and the way that it works. I think that's probably every medium to large organization in the world has some methodology that they're using around encrypted tunnels and being able to encrypt data, and it's a very common way to do it. I get asked all the time when people are studying for their Network Plus exam is I've got these videos on my website. The videos are absolutely free. They look through the videos, but they want to be able to take advantage of other study materials, which I highly recommend. You should not just watch my videos and say, well, that's all I need. I've got the videos. I've had people come to me and said, all I used were your videos to study. And I took the exam, and I think, oh, good, but you might have want to read a book or looked at perhaps performing some hands-on work, or maybe taking yourself through a pop quiz, maybe a sample set of questions before you walk into the exam. Well, fortunately, the folks at GTS Learning have their freestyle product, and they are a sponsor of our Network Plus study group every month. If you go to professormesser.com/netlabs, you'll find their newest product, which is a series of labs that you can and work in this virtual environment. We were just talking about virtual servers. You can create and have available for you these virtual devices. They're already preloaded with operating system. They're already preloaded with Active Directory configurations. They already have operating systems for Linux and XP and Vista and 7 and other things that are out there. And you're able to perform packet captures. You're able to perform your dig commands, your NS lookups, your pings. You can look at routing tables. You can understand what's going on across the network. You can build very complex networking configurations and have a look at them. In fact, I say build, they're really already built for you. GTS Learning has already put together labs that correlate back to the requirements for the Network Plus exam, and you can step through all of these labs in real time as if you had all of those devices sitting in your room, except they've already been built. They're already licensed. They already have all of the correct utilities on them. You have everything you need to be able to do this. And when I talked to them originally about this, there was a certain cost associated with it, but they said, well, if you tell the folks on your study group, we'll give them a deal. Normally it's $159. If you're watching this either live or on the replay, head over to professormesser.com/netlabs. They have a lab special that's $99, and you've got all the labs you need for your Network Plus training. And these days, that's even more important because, of course, CompTIA has added performance-based questions to the exam. So they may be asking you for some hands-on. The performance-based questions aren't all hands-on questions, but people have already reported that, yep, they got a hands-on question. They had to type something into the command line. They had to perform a function to be able to look at information. And that's how they were graded for those questions on there. Very, very useful to have that capability. And the fact that it's already set up and you don't need an operating system and you don't need license codes and you don't have to set up the networking. It's already there waiting for you. And what you have to concentrate on are just the things that are expected for you to get through your certification. That's it. That's at professormesser.com/netlabs. And we appreciate GTS Learning, of course, for being a sponsor of the study group. Well, every month you send me questions that are technical questions, but you also send me questions about other things as well. This is one of these that I get every month, which is an acronym question. And the acronym I got was NTP. Don't answer in the chat room, but you can go to vot.rs and go to 606497 and answer the question of what is NTP. This is something we use quite a bit on our networks of what NTP happens to be. Again, don't answer in the chat room. Do not say it. Don't. But go to vot.rs and you'll be able to decide for yourself what NTP happens to be. Now, I've got a few choices available for you. One of the choices is Network Time Protocol. We've got Network Technology Processing, Near Technology Processing, Network Terminal Protocol, or Network Transfer Protocol. And you can, of course, go to vot.rs and go to 606497 to be able to answer this particular question. What is NTP? You folks are voting fast. We've got 29 respondents. I voted for the vot.rs 606497 who says, yes, I know exactly what NTP is. Let's see if you do. Let's look at the results. And the answers are a mix. Again, we're torn. I didn't get anybody give me network technology processing. Nobody gave me near technology processing. One person said network terminal protocol. 17 people said network transfer protocol. And in our particular example here, network time protocol is what NTP is. Network transfer protocol, not such a thing. There is no protocol called the network transfer protocol. If there is, it's so archaic or so obscure that you would never run into it in real world. If you're ever talking with a network professional and they said, I need you to check the NTP server, they need you to check the network time protocol device. I just put a bunch of words together for all these other things. They don't actually exist out there in the real world. And the reason I asked the question this month is, what would you use this for? You may have heard this all the time about what is NTP even good for? Why would you even use this? Is it really that useful? You gotta have a server just for time? Because I looked at my phone right now and yeah, it tells me what time it is. Looked at my watch, tells me what time it is. I don't need a server. I don't need a service on a server. What's the point of that? Well, NTP, of course, is an important protocol because when you're dealing with networking equipment, when you're dealing with workstations, when you're dealing with servers, it is remarkably important to keep everything synchronized with the right time. And we can use external devices on the internet. I have a lot of my devices go to pool.ntp.org, which are a series of open NTP servers on the internet, because I'm not going to keep an NTP server here, or I don't want to. I just have to be that good. But think about looking at the logs on a server, the logs on a workstation, the logs on a switch, the logs on a firewall, and the logs on a router. And somebody says, I have a problem that occurred yesterday at 8 p.m. Well, if you didn't have everything synchronized, your router might have a few seconds off. Your firewall might be a few minutes off. Maybe somebody forgot to set the time for daylight time here in the US, which just happened. It's an hour off. And you're trying to put these logs together, and they're all from a different time. You can't figure it out. It becomes incredibly difficult to figure those pieces out. So from a coordination perspective, NTP becomes really useful. There becomes another good reason for it as well. If you are an organization that uses Kerberos, which is just one example of where you might take advantage of this, Kerberos is one that requires that all of your machines are at least pretty close to what time it is, by a couple of hours. Has to be somewhat close to what the actual time is, because those certificates that are built and the tickets that you get, which are really certificates, those tickets you get from Kerberos are only good for a certain amount of time. If you come in and it says that your local time is way off the norm, it's not going to build you a ticket. Say, nope, don't gain access. No good there. So sometimes when you're performing these encryption, verification, validation methods of authenticating people to the network or doing encryption, you have to make sure that those certificates and the information sent from one machine to the other have the proper timestamps in them. And a great way to do this automatically, NTP. So you'll run into that quite a bit. And that's why it's so important that the NTP servers you are using are not only available and correct, but also redundant. You don't want to lose an NTP server. These days, a lot of people integrate this into their Active Directory servers. If you're a large Microsoft shop, because every Active Directory server out there, you certainly are going to have more than one of those. You can load up an NTP server on it as well and it'd be there as well. And then chat room, John mentions what? No GPS. It's very common for people who need very, very, very precise NTP coordination to be able to use a GPS to be able to get the appropriate timestamp from the satellites that are floating above the Earth. That's one common way. You may have somebody that has their NTP server set up with that. And there's different levels of NTP servers, that the stratum levels, they're called, to be able to determine how accurate your NTP server is. I need it like close enough to a second. I don't need a lot there. And getting into the whole stratum, what stratum 1 is, stratum 2, and all those pieces are a little bit outside the scope. But that's, if you're interested in setting it up in an NTP server and you want to know about those stratum levels, there's your Google term right there to go figure that piece out. And because NTP itself and time itself, if you want to get into that level of intricacy with determining timestamps, it gets a little bit crazy. So pretty much interesting, and in fact deals absolutely with delays and other pieces associated with it. Let's talk about the exam itself, because it's important to know topics that are on the exam, but it's also important to know the things you are expecting when you walk in the door to actually take the exam. And one of the questions I got this month, and maybe it's somebody who just came into this certification piece relatively new, or maybe you haven't done a certification exam before, or even if you don't know the history, this might be a good question to you, which is, why did CompTIA put performance-based questions on the exam? Because as KH mentions here, that's a bit of a quandary. If we go back prior to the beginning of 2013 and you walked in to take a Network Plus exam, you got multiple choice exam. That's all you needed to know was you go in and you bubble A, B, C, or D, and sometimes E. That's it. You didn't have any other type of question presented to you. You had to go through this multiple choice exam. When you were done, you were graded, and there's your result. And people in the industry felt that, well, that's really easy, isn't it? You don't have to fill in the blank. You don't have to match anything up. You don't have to do any hands-on. You don't have to put things in a certain order. All you have to do is answer multiple choice. Shouldn't the exam be harder than that? Shouldn't it really test you on what you know? And CompTIA said, yeah, you've got a point there. Really should test you on what you know. Now, of course, performance-based questions you can't just turn them on. They had to develop the software and have it deployed to all of their testing sites, and they had to go through a beta process and make sure that it really was going to test you and properly grade you on what you're doing with these performance-based questions. But that's why it was created, because you don't want your certification to be worthless. You certainly don't want the rest of the industry to look and say, oh, you got a Network Plus? Whatever. Just a bunch of multiple choice questions. Anybody can do that. But with performance-based questions, you're actually now asked to perform a task or think about how to put things in a certain order or be able to match things that have a relationship. And that's pretty good. Now, in the chat room, Benny's asking, well, does the CompTIA site, the sample test, do they have performance-based questions? No, they don't. They don't. At least I haven't seen any yet. Maybe they've stuck some out there in the last week or so that I don't know about, but they have not put anything out there for performance-based questions. Now, they do have a video that describes what you might see with a performance-based question. And if you go to professormesser.com/FAQ, you'll see that I have a series of frequently asked questions videos there, and you can get information about those pieces. I think that's a bit more of a challenge, isn't it? Trying to figure out how to type in a command. I need to do a dig command. I need to perform a ping command. And they may ask you, perform a ping command and make it so that it continues to ping until you hit Control-C or Control-Break. It's one of those things that you have to know. You aren't going to guess at that one. You got to type it in a command line. Or maybe they're going to ask you about what protocols may be encapsulated within another, and you have to put them in order. So those are situations that might have you pause and wonder, am I answering this one correctly? I don't know. Let's go through the process, and you have to put them in order on the screen. So I kind of like those kind of questions. I think it extends out. And I've been thinking myself, how can I build some performance-based questions for you? And I think as more information is learned about what they are using, that might be useful. Charles in the chat room is asking, how many performance-based questions can I expect to get on the exam? And the initial reports have been anywhere between 1 to 3, 1 to 4, somewhere in there. And they're starting with those questions. So the first thing you do is sit down and you take the performance-based questions, and then it goes into the traditional multiple choice. And at that point, you may not get the number of multiple choice questions that you might expect. In fact, you might get fewer multiple choice questions depending on the performance-based questions you got. So pretty useful to know not the whole thing. It's not all, it's okay, relax. It's not all multiple, it's not all performance-based questions. You get multiple choice in there as well. There's a mix. Don't think you're going to walk in and the entire thing's going to be a lab. Boy, wouldn't that be great? We sat down and well, now you got to know all your command lines right now. You got 90 questions, go. That would not be good. So it is a mix between those. And you might get a certain number of multiple choice. It now varies depending on where you're going and who you're talking to. So the labs will, as they mentioned in the chat room, the labs, if you go into those labs and you're going through the process of doing it at the command line, you're understanding how the operating system works, that really works quite nicely. Another question that came in from KM is, will we need to know any of the RFC numbers for the Network Plus exam? If you're doing anything with networking, tons of RFCs. You need to know the RFC for OSPF, the latest RFC for OSPF. You need to know the RFC for private IP addresses. Do you need to know the RFC for topic X? You don't, fortunately. And a really good qualification of this is if you go to the CompTIA website and you download the exam objectives. At the top of the Network Plus page, if you go to freenetworkplus.com, it redirects you over to the Professor Messer website and the Network Plus videos. And at the top of the Network Plus video index is a link that says download the exam objectives here. Click this, go get them. And the reason I put it right at the top is that's the first thing you should be doing. You should be going right to the top of that list before you start studying, and certainly before you walk into the exam, is to have the exam objectives. Those exam objectives for CompTIA are incredibly detailed. I was speaking with someone in the chat room last night, and we were talking about Microsoft, because I have a Microsoft Configuring Windows 7 course on my website. And they said, are you going to do more of these? And I said, I don't know, because Microsoft gives you a line that describes something you should know, a very broad description of something you should know, and that's it. They don't give you anything else. You don't know any detail. It says, know how to do this at the command line. But they don't tell you what command that is. They don't tell you what switches you should know. They don't tell you if you need to know other commands that are similar to it. They give you no idea, but CompTIA gives you an incredibly detailed explanation of exactly what's on the exam. If you have not downloaded this exam list, these exam objectives, you are completely missing out on a huge study opportunity. So make sure you go out and get those exam objectives. Yeah, they mentioned in the chat room, Rhonda mentions there's other companies that do give you more detail about this. I'm really picking on Microsoft at this case because Microsoft needs to give you better exam objectives. Microsoft, talking to you, go do it. Because other companies, CompTIA is one of them, they give you great exam objectives. Wouldn't it be nice if you did the same? You should think about that. Let me send them a letter. Don't get me started about exam objectives, because I think that it's important to know Microsoft, but they apparently don't feel the same. Microsoft. So there's a question that came in from NP. How would you advise someone planning to skip Network Plus and go right to Security Plus. Is that a good idea? Is it not a good idea? This is one of those times where downloading the exam objectives actually might be the first thing I'd offer. I'd recommend and say, well, download both of them. See if you think you can do the Security Plus without taking the Network Plus. Now, the Network Plus exam has a ton of networking and a little bit of security. The Security Plus exam has a ton of security and a little bit of networking. But if you've done anything with security, you know there is a huge networking component to network security. In fact, where you commonly see security people, they used to be network people. Now they are in the security department because there's so much networking associated with it. There's firewalls. They're setting up networking security on your network switches. There is getting syslog servers and sending large amounts of information across the network. There's managing VPN connectivity. There's managing site-to-site IPSec VPN connectivity. And all of these things are very, very network-centric. Now, if you're already a network person, then take security. I took my CompTIA exams in exactly the opposite way that they recommend. Because CompTIA says take your A+ first, then take your Network Plus second, and then take your Security Plus, and now maybe the CASP, the higher level security. The way I took it, I took my Security Plus first, then I took my Networking Plus, and then I finally took my A+. Now, my example is not a very good one because I was already in the security field, and one of the things that I needed to do for my annual review was pass an industry certification in security and a bunch of other certifications as well. But, well, I thought I'll just take Security Plus. Done. Finished. But then I started working on these videos. I thought let's do some Network Plus videos. Gosh, if I build some Network Plus videos, wouldn't it be a good idea if I was Network Plus certified? Just saying. It's probably a good idea. So I got Network Plus certified. And then, of course, I decided to do the A+ videos. Same problem. How are you supposed to trust somebody giving you certification videos if they're not certified for that certification? So, know why we went all the way over there for that. But that's what happened. So finally ended up taking my A+. So take the path that's right for you. Take the exam that's right for you. Don't worry about what necessarily CompTIA is telling you. Take the one that makes sense for where you happen to be with your knowledge and your experience. Now, the one thing to keep in mind for your A+, your Network Plus, and your Security Plus, CompTIA has a recommendation of what you should know before you take those exams, but there are no formal prerequisites. You are not required to have any other type of exam or education or experience to take any of these certification exams. So you can absolutely walk in, take your Security Plus first thing. Not a problem. Go for it. Rock and roll. Not going to be an issue. Just go the path that makes sense for you. And if you want to know more about security, you've been asked to do security, that's a great way to do it. Another question that came in was, please talk about what industries and jobs can someone get into with Network Plus. So we've already talked a little bit about security, but Network Plus is an interesting place. I started with desktop management. I started really with applications on the desktop. When my first job out of college was working at a computer store and doing break fix, really doing printer cable deliveries. I was installing hard drives back when hard drives were new. I was taking machines that did not have hard drives. I was putting hard drives inside of them. So my solidarity, my old school people out there, you understand where I'm coming from. Adding memory upgrades into devices, doing some break fix. My first big job was with a corporation where I started working with applications, specifically spreadsheets, and doing some training of spreadsheets and learning more about it and speccing out people's workstations and that type of thing. Then I saw someone working on the network. They had a sniffer, they had a network analyzer they were working with. I thought, that's pretty cool. And what that got me into was setting up and architecting the network design. It was troubleshooting network connectivity. It was understanding how to optimize the protocols and the communication from one site to another, in our case, from workstations to mainframes, from workstations across the wide area network. How would we set up a wide area network connectivity? How would we build those different routing mechanisms and set up our routing tables and our metrics to be able to get information from one place to the other? So these days, if you get in a Network Plus certification, you can think of starting in that network group, maybe getting into the part of the help desk that handles network problems, a tier 2, a tier 3, or in the network team itself, where you're configuring switches, you're setting up ports on different VLANs, You're setting up routing configurations. You're making sure that sites can communicate with each other. There's some great jobs there and great careers that you could build just doing networking. Some fantastic careers, because networking is a relatively complex thing. There are a lot of intricacies. There's things I'm learning every day with networking. I learn stuff all the time because there's no possible way you can know everything about networking. And that's just one tiny piece of IT. That's one little segment of the world with IT. So when you start looking at what jobs can I really do with networking, those are the types of things you should look at. So go out to your favorite career site that has job postings and look through those for network administrator. Look for someone who is doing network troubleshooting, and that should give you an idea of the types of things you can get into. There's some good things there to go through. Well, every week I like to give you a link that might help you in your path to getting this Network Plus certification. One of the things that is in Network Plus is the idea of using something other than Telnet to be able to send information to a router or switch so that all of your communications over that terminal connection are encrypted. So of course you would use something like SSH. Or if you're on a Windows device, SSH is not included. There's no SSH client built into Windows. You have to find one and download it. And sometimes you can find them easy. There are a couple of different options available for you on Windows, but sometimes it's not just the client you need, you also need other things. So I find a quick way to find everything I want on my Windows machines is I go out to Ninite. Now, if you've seen Ninite, you're going, oh yeah, Ninite, that's awesome. If you've never been out to Ninite.com, this will change the world for you. Ninite.com allows you to pick a list of different things. So you can see in Ninite, what browser would you like to install? Chrome, Opera, Firefox. Here's some messaging applications. Here's some media. So I might tell you, oh, well, you've got my Network Plus videos. You need VLC or you need QuickTime. Or you can go out here and click VLC and QuickTime, and it will install both of those for you. You don't have to go to the VLC site. You don't have to go to the QuickTime site. And if you're taking your Network Plus, you're going to want to scroll down here to the bottom. Scroll. Look at all this stuff. Scroll down here to the bottom, and you'll probably want PuTTY as well, which is an SSH client. If you're doing secure file transfers, you might want SCP. So here's a really good example of how I now can pick and choose from all of these different utilities that are out here. Maybe, oh, we're doing Network Plus and security. Maybe you also want to grab, so all good one, goodbye. Grab TrueCrypt. TrueCrypt's awesome. Grab that one. Those are good. You can find new things here that you never even knew existed out on Ninite.com, Ninite.com. And from there, you're able to grab and find all these different applications, and in one click, be able to download them immediately. They also have some enterprise type things to be able to take advantage of that. That's the Ninite is a Windows only thing. And if you have a lot of Windows machines, you wanted to install a lot of different applications at once, they have a method where you can do that on a large scale as well. So very nice. You can look at that on the Ninite website. And Benny, if you're running Linux, you're running Mac OS X, you're running some other Unix-based operating systems, they all come with SSH clients built in. Really, it's your Windows folks that really, really, really need to make sure you've got all of those utilities at a glance. Well, we've come to the end of another Network Plus study group, but I want to make you aware of things that are important to me because, I don't know, I'm selfish that way. And you might find some interesting things out there, actually. Our YouTube channel can be found at professormesser.com/YouTube. Go out there, subscribe. YouTube, the folks at Google, I would love for this study group to get more bandwidth and a higher resolution. And the best way is to get more subscribers and more likes to those videos. If you like a video, do a thumbs up. You'd be surprised how important that is to me and how important it looks to Google. Also, find us on Twitter at professormesser.com/Twitter, at Google Plus at professormesser.com/Google Plus. I am on Facebook, although grudgingly, but a lot of you are as well, so it's a good way to keep in track of what we're doing. We also have a wiki we're putting together. If you'd like to participate in the building of that wiki, you can find it at professormesser.com/wiki. And more of a certainly a level that's selfish, probably is the best way to describe it, is I'm running out of room in my Dropbox. If you've never used Dropbox before and you go to professormesser.com/Dropbox and sign up, my quota gets bigger. And this is when I travel around. I travel quite a bit. When I travel around, I put the presentations I'm working on in my Dropbox, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger when you go through all of those things. Thanks again to GTS Learning. Their labs that you can find out at professormesser.com/netlabs. And of course, thanks to all of you. We wouldn't be able to do these study groups without your help. And we sure appreciate you joining us again this month. Of course, if you ever want to know what we're doing with any of our study groups, go out to professormesser.com/calendar, and hopefully I'll be quick enough to have updated that when you finally get there. If it's not updated, just keep checking back. Thanks for joining us this month, and we'll see you next time on the Professor Messer Network Plus Study Group.